Commission members Brown,
Present.
Fuller,
Present.
Harris,
Present.
Kerr,
Present.
Mercy, Vice Chair Rodriguez, Chairman Little.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Invocation by Bobby Moody, Anglo International, please. Yeah, rise, please.
Father, we thank you for being a God who hears and answers prayer. So we come today to ask you for your presence, your wisdom, your grace, and your mercy for the leaders of our city here today and all they represent. Lord, give them your insight to lead us well for solutions to the difficult issues in our cities, and bless their efforts. Give their families your peace and joy in this wonderful season of celebrating your birth, Jesus. We pray in your name. Amen. Merry Christmas.
Remain standing for flag salute. Commissioner Harris.
Put your hand over your heart and repeat with me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm going to change things around a little bit. Mr. DeRico.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. In light of today, we have actually, I'd like to move my time to the front of the agenda for presentation, and alternate that presentation from the CMCC consultants. We can table that till after the first year. And I'd like to bring up our three consultants from Hillard Hines, Robert Balmer, Robert Haas, and Betty Kalepis. I always get that wrong, yes. If they could please stand up. We have a great presentation on the hybrid model that we've been discussing for some time. We have some very exciting news for the future, and I think it's going to be a great presentation for the public to see the direction we're going as a city.
Thank you, Lee. And I think we have a PowerPoint that I'm going to pop up there. But my name is Bob Bomer. I'm with a company called Hillard Hines. We're actually part of a larger company called Jensen Hughes. We do security risk, emergency management, investigations, and law enforcement consulting, among other things. We were engaged by the city earlier this year to start looking at the hybrid law enforcement model. You'll hear us starting to use the term of hybrid policing model, and we'll explain why in a few minutes. It's different than law enforcement. It's policing. There's a subtle difference when you use the terms, and we'll talk about that a little more as we go forward. Our team members, the three main team members that are here, is Robert Haas, Betty Kalepis, and if, they'll come up and talk about some of these things as we move forward on the PowerPoint. Let me see if I can make sure I get up ahead. So I first wanted to, so I gave you a little bit of background on Hillard Hines, but I really want to jump into some of the methodology and our approach as we went through this process. We took a look at any kind of policies that you had here, any documentation about policing in Lancaster. That included, we also looked at the data. You have a lot of good data sources through IBM Watson. We took a look at the data, started to kind of get a picture of what's going on here in the city. Spent a lot of time on interviews from city employees, stakeholders, community members, youth groups. Spent a lot of time at the sheriff's department talking about from the sheriff's office perspective, what they're doing in Lancaster. And with all that kind of input, we tried to put together essentially some principles and goals in a discussion. I'll back up off so we took the data, we took the input from the community stakeholders, we compared it to models of policing that we know that work, and started to work on developing some principles that can apply to this hybrid law policing effort that we're discussing. Ultimately, we took those principles, then applied them specifically to Lancaster and see how this fits in the Lancaster environment, and came up with a core kind of a way of going forward with this model. So we'll talk a little bit more details now about how we got to where the model is and some of the principles. But I want to get Betty to talk a little bit about the stakeholders and some of the input that we received from the stakeholders as we went through this process. And this is not every single detail everybody said, but we gathered from the interviews, we gathered some larger themes of what we were hearing.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I was here, I started back in January with Rob. He actually made a presentation to your commission. Back then, I was doing interviews at that point. But for some of you who don't know who I am, my name is Betty Kelopez. I am retired LAPD. I was there for 24 years, became the chief of the San Diego Harbor Police. And I'm now retired from law enforcement. I'm an attorney and a private investigator. I do lots of other stuff. But I worked with Hillard Heinz before. I'm the subject matter expert for law enforcement and, frankly, for Lancaster in the Antelope Valley. I was raised here. I went to Paiute Elementary School. I was at Del Sur Junior High. I went to Quartz Hill High School, graduated in And so now I'm back, and I still have family here. I still have friends here, so this is a real important effort for us and for me personally to make sure we do this right the first time. So part of that was the stakeholder input, and frankly, that was very important to me because these are my friends and family. And we heard one thing that was overwhelmingly very important to everybody here, and that's we don't want to get rid of the Sheriff's Department. Sheriff's Department remains, and that is extremely important to our efforts here, and that we've ensured that was incorporated into the process. So the essential role of the Sheriff's Department, very important. Secondarily, they don't want the same old thing. The community, the stakeholders, which are you, the community members, the churches, the leaders in the community, the stakeholders all over the city said, we just don't want the same thing. We want something that's different. So we're going to reimagine something that hasn't really been totally used the same way we're doing it. And we're going to look at it and see if we can make this effective. It will be really wonderful for everybody. So having said that, we have done that, and you're going to hear that from Bob Hawes. Secondarily, the most important part of this reimagining is those community partnerships, the relationships with not just the community and the stakeholders, but the advocates for the various groups, for the services that are provided internally within the organization, within the city, how they work together. Having a great trusting relationship with the Sheriff's Department and working together and making that a collaborative relationship and not just, well, we'll bring them in when we want to. Let's see how we can collaborate and work together to solve chronic problems in your city, chronic problems that are of value to you. They represent the values of this city. So then the second part of that being is that those values and what we learned are there's some very clear chronic problems in the city of Lancaster that the Sheriff's Department doesn't have the ability to properly address because they're so overwhelmed with other issues. And those chronic problems may be low-level problems. We learned about the whole issue of the graffiti and the illegal dumping and the homelessness problems that have caused so many problems in your community. They're your value systems. They're your things that matter to you. And the Sheriff's Department hasn't been able to, because of their capacity, deal with those issues. So we'll work collaboratively to help you on those. But the other chronic problems are those problems that create those calls for services that are over and over and over and over again that haven't been solved. So we'll do the deep dives to work on that and to solve those problems. And then I think one of the most important part about your city is that you have some really good data sources and some really good data systems to be able to leverage the data that you have. Your Comcast system, which is your complaints to the community, your INRIC system, which is your traffic, and your IBM Watson that can do the analysis along with the data from the Sheriff's Department to really get a feel for where the problems are, how you can work on that, and to analyze that information. And then finally, the most important part in any effort, and we're saying this over and over and over again, is the community has to be part of those solutions. If they're not part of those solutions, this isn't going to work. So involving the community in the various capacities to ensure that we solve the problems. Bob Hawes, who is also a former chief, is going to talk to you a little bit about that and that process. Bob?
So
Oh, you're next still?
Yeah, let me
Okay.
jump first into some of those core principles. And Betty, you addressed these as some of those desired goals, leveraging the data and the community and things like that. And so we distilled a lot of this information into some core principles that this group should operate by. Number one, and a constant ongoing principle, is building trust. Constant engagement in the community, constant building trust activities, because this relies on not a police officer kind of just helping the community. It involves the community partnering with the department to solve problems. So building trust and constantly doing efforts to continue that trust is going to be key to this. Second is, as Betty talked about a little bit, is that transformation. It's kind of a reorientation of the mission. That's going to be involve a lot of, in a lot of cases, hiring the right people. You have to have the right people at the table that have this mindset about problem solving, about co-producing the public safety with the community. So it's bringing those right people in and the reorientation of how do we do policing in Lancaster from that perspective of the problem solving. The next part is really the approaches to problem solving, and as Bob will talk about the model shortly, it's looking at creating districts, maybe based on data, based on community priorities, but creating districts in the city where there can be a single officer assigned to a geographic area that is the go-to person for that community, so that if I have an issue in that community, I can call this officer. This officer has the responsibility of working with the community to address the problem that they're encountering. So that's a key component. There's a lot more pieces to that, but that's one of the key components when you look at the problem-solving approach. Next thing is broadening that external partnerships. A police department, even the city itself, cannot solve the problems alone. And so you need those partners, those service providers, those other government agencies, and whatever it might be. You need strong collaborative partnerships with those groups, because the problems are going to be things that sometimes require those resources that you just don't have, but you have a partner or a service provider that has those resources and understands how to address those issues. Next is the transparency and coordination. In order to develop this trust, this really goes hand in hand with the trust building. You have to be transparent. You have to keep your community informed of what you're doing, how you're doing it, keep the partners informed. Transparency is a key to building the trust. Using the metrics as well, the technology. Number one, the data-driven approaches. IBM Watson, again, is a great resource. Applying some analytical capability, using IBM Watson, using that to identify the problem areas into small areas and small problems, being able to identify the areas, but also being able to measure your effectiveness, looking at the effectiveness of a particular problem-solving approach for a particular problem you might have found in one of the communities in Lancaster, to analyzing the entire effort. Are we we designed this to achieve something. Are we achieving those efforts? And it all depends on creating real good, having good data and creating good measures to be able to constantly measure yourself to say, are we meeting the expectations? Are we getting the job done? So essentially those are the core principles, and what we did is take these core principles now and translate them, and what does this start to look like in Lancaster, and how can we start to operationalize these things. And Bob is going to spend time talking a little bit about the operational components.
Good morning. As Betty indicated, I've been in policing for 40 years. I've been a chief executive officer in 3 different agencies during my professional career. I also want to reassure you that this model we're talking about is not created pie in the sky. It really is grounded in actual practice in a number of different jurisdictions. This is the only place in the United States where we're marrying 2 agencies together in terms of joint collaboration and rolling the model out. So I want to make sure that you don't think we just started to create this at a whole cloth. That really the principles are really well-grounded, well-founded. We've actually seen them operational and working, but we're applying it very differently because it's a very unique situation here in Lancaster. So I want to reassure you all that this is not something that we just kind of dreamed up, but we really made sure that we were listening to what people had to say, heard what the stakeholders had to say, because it's so critical that the stakeholders have a voice in this whole process. And that stakeholder means community members, it means the business community, the faith community, it also means other partners who are going to be working with them. One of the closest partners in this whole process is the LA Sheriff's Department. These two agencies have to work joint, hand in hand, very closely and collaboratively. What this new entity is going to be doing is an extension of what the Sheriff's Department is already doing as essential law enforcement services to the community of Lancaster. So it's extremely important to understand what that connection looks like. Core to that is the way the organization looks, and it looks very different than conventional law enforcement agencies. When we talk about flattening an organization, we mean that there's not a lot of layers in between, but it's really a close connection between the folks that are out in the field and the Director of Public Safety. That is how closely it's working, because it's so dependent upon the fact that you don't have missteps, miscommunication, or breakdown in the process. And because they're doing a different kind of police work, it is critical that that ongoing communication is taking place every day. Center to and critical to the whole operation are what we're calling district coordinating peacekeepers or peace officers in the districts. And these folks are the ones that are actually out in the field. They're the ones that are actually doing the work. And unlike most police organizations, they're the ones that have a great deal of autonomy. They have a great deal of responsibility, but there's also a great deal of accountability in terms of what they're doing out in the field and moving forward. It's actually inverting a police department's organization, where the line services, line level, is really the forefront and an important part of the organization, and not necessarily the hierarchy at the top of the organization. The chief administrative officer, chief executive officer are there to support what the officers are doing in the field and giving them the support that they need, giving them the resources they need, but also taking care of situations that they can't address while they're out in the field. A lot of what's in the Department of Public Safety exists, but we're going to reformat it and re-engineer it so that it fits into the model. So a lot of the work that folks are doing has kind of grown over time. So it looks at how do we start to reorganize that work, but making sure the folks that are working and supporting the DCPOs are in that role capacity of support, so that really the thrust of this model is the services that are being delivered out in the field, and that the people are having direct contact and the direct follow-up with the issues that they're trying to face or the priorities that they have within their community in terms of going forward. We've broken the organization down into two divisions, operational division, which is the DCPOs, and then the internal workings, which are critically important in supporting them, whether it's analytics, or it's administrative support, or it's all the work that needs to make sure the operation of the organization is running properly. What's going to be critical here is making sure you put people in the right places, in the right geographic areas, so that they can actually be responsive and do the follow-up that the Sheriff's Department doesn't have the time to because of its caseload and workload that it presently has. So Betty talked about this extensively. Bob talked about this extensively. What's core and critical to this project is the collaborative relationships, not just with members of the community, but as we said before, other agencies, other city departments, but also other service providers and other resources within the community, and having those kinds of relationships on an ongoing basis. And we talk about those relationships. We just don't mean an acquaintance. We mean deep-seated, connected relationships where the DCPOs really have the ability to navigate, convene, and actually do some community organization with respect to the areas that they've been assigned and working in. Community engagement is key to this, that the community has to be involved in this process, and we talk about it as the co-production of public safety. So it's really the police and the community working together. It's not the police providing services, but really working in tandem with the community to solve problems, address issues, and really create an environment that they feel safe. There's a sense of community. There's a sense of higher qualities of life that are going on an ongoing basis. We talked about the extension to the LSCPD, and that takes on many places. It takes place at the administration level, where there's a day-to-day contact with the captain of the Lancaster station, working hand-in-hand with the Sheriff's Department, making sure there's communications going back and forth. It's the data exchange that comes out of the Sheriff's Department back to the department, so they can actually start to look at chronic issues, repetitive issues, issues that need to be addressed within the community, and start to do their deep-seated problem solving. It's also an extension of the investigation, criminal investigation piece, which still does the LSAPD is going to be doing in terms of investigating crimes. But who's their connection back to the community to actually help them develop information from the community, but also be that contact with the victim and moving to what we call a victim-centric approach. So if you have a situation where your house has been broken into, The investigators come out, do the investigation. Who's doing the follow-up? Who's connecting back with that family, making sure that they have the service they need? And then also, as they have questions about the investigation, connecting back to the investigators within the LSAPD to get them the answers that they need, because their investigators are very busy. And a lot of times folks don't know who to go to, but if I know the one person who's representing my district at DCPO, because I have his business card, I have his telephone number, I have his email, I have the ability to text him, you have that ongoing communications back and forth. And so it's really critical at that level as well. And then also community engagement, where the LSAPD, I'm in the wrong city. The Sheriff's Department and the Department of Public Safety are working together in collaboration. So it's not two separate entities and two separate police departments. It's still a police entity or police service that's connected and still engaging with the community and working in the community. And it's the coordination of services, I said before. How do we bring in folks that need those kinds of services? And when I don't know where to go, who do I call to figure out where to navigate to? How do I get connected to those services? And again, because the DCPOs know folks inside those agencies, I'm not misdirecting you, or I'm not just handing you off and having you go someplace. What I'm saying to you is I'm going to help you get to where you need to go, and then I'm going to come back and do the follow-up. So what it becomes is a front-end extension of those services, and actually doing the follow-up back in the community, because they have the ability to do that and go back out to the community and making sure things are moving the way they should be moving. If not, then figuring out the right way to kind of do that kind of problem solving. We talk about flexible operations, meaning these folks are not working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're working schedules, but they're working schedules that are flexible enough so they can be in the areas and at times and days when they need to be. But again, they're not lost their connection back to the community, because you have that cell phone that they have in their hands all the time that's assigned to them. And the folks have the business card so they can reach out to them. If I can't call you because you're not working, I can leave that message with you and know that you're going to follow up the next day or two, and not have to wait long periods of time before you hear back from somebody, because it's their job to do that kind of follow-up. And what's more important, what's critical to this whole model, is fixed geographic boundaries. These folks are assigned to those fixed geographic boundaries, and they don't move around. So when they get assigned to an area that you may have a business or where you live, that's the same person you'll be working with all the time. It's not going to be people moving around or jumping around, but they're assigned to that geographic area for a variety of reasons. One, to know those areas really well, to build those kinds of interpersonal relationships that need to exist, because it's person to person now. It's not person to a police officer, but it's actually knowing who your DCPO is and being able to reach them and have that ongoing conversation with them. But then also being able to respond to problems that are occurring or chronic or repetitive in nature, and staying with the problem to get it resolved once it's been identified, and working your way all the way through that process. As we said before, the dispatch function still is going to be going through the Sheriff's Department. 911 is handled by the Sheriff's Department. When it requires an immediate police response, you call the Sheriff's Department. If it's a situation that's a quality of life issue that doesn't require immediate response, you will call your DCPO. And they're the ones who are going to be responding. So it's kind of a bifurcated system, but it's very clear that if I need police services right away, I'm going to the Sheriff's Department. If I need to have an issue addressed, or I have questions, or I don't know where to go in terms of getting services, I'll go to my DCPO in terms of going forward. It requires a body of policy and procedures in order to make sure that the policy procedures line up with the vision and the overall philosophy of the model in terms of going forward. There's not a disconnect between what I'm telling my people to do and what the overall vision of the agency is in terms of going forward. And it's really about looking at analytics. It's looking at monitoring problems, understanding where those issues are, but not just dealing with the symptomatic level of those issues, but really deep dive into what's causing those. A lot of times, crime is a symptom of something else. It's not the root cause, but the problems are. And so really understanding what that is, getting at those issues, and then making the appropriate referrals and doing that kind of deep dive in terms of problem solving in conjunction with and in collaboration with the community. And so it's not just analytics, but it's also listening to the community and community identifying what their priorities are and responding to those priorities. So it's actually looking at data, but it's also listening to the community and making sure that I'm listening to what their priorities are and I'm being responsive to those priorities. We talked about equipment, but the key piece of equipment that they're going to have in their hands is that mobile phone that's assigned to them. But there's all sorts of analytics they're going to be privy to in terms of analytic products, but also how they communicate effectively with the people that are within their region, within their community, within their geographic boundaries in terms of going forward. And as Bob indicated, there's actually benchmarks to hold the accountability. At the heart of this is community sentiment. How does the community feel about their public safety? How does the community feel about their quality of life? How does the community feel in terms of confidence and trust in the police because they have a relationship now going forward. And those are all vitally important. Those are all qualitative assessments that need to take place. We're going to look at repetitive crimes, chronic issues, as a qualitative or quantitative piece of information, but then we're also looking at internal benchmarks to make sure that the officers are performing the way they're supposed to be performing and they're getting the support that they need to solve those kinds of problems in terms of going forward. There's a whole bunch of things that we're actually having a lot of conversations with Lee about in terms of the things preparing to move forward in terms of getting the model up and running. Understanding what the legislative needs are, making sure that you have post-certified DCPOs and what that process looks like, and getting the kinds of training that they need. But it's going beyond that post-certification in terms of the kind of special trainings that these folks are going to need in order to effectively deal with social issues within their geographic and boundary areas. Negotiated agreements and protocols with the LSAPD, there's a lot of work to do in terms of, we talk about how they're going to work together, but what does that look like? Tangibly, what's that look at? What's the protocols that are going to be followed? How people are connecting? How's information shared back and forth so that we don't have missteps along the way and it does become seamless to the community, that there's not a disconnect between the two critical law enforcement agencies or policing agencies within the community and the budget development. When we talk about budget development, we talk about a multi-year budget development, moving from 1 year to the next towards a 3-year strategic plan moving out. So every year the budget is building on itself, and there are milestones within those budgets to demonstrate that they're moving in that right direction and building the organization over time. This entity will grow over time as it expands in terms of its reach and its ability in terms of reaching out to the community. Talk about written directives. We also talked about recruiting and hiring as being very different. You're looking for a different caliber person that's going to be doing a different kind of police work and really have a different kind of mindset with respect to how they're going to engage the community, what their core mission is within the community, and the kind of work they're going to be doing. They are not responding to calls for service. They're not using arrest as their main tool for dealing with how they deal with issues. A lot of what they're doing is in the area of social justice and social services and really moving people towards those directions when they need it. They have the ability to make arrests if they have to, but then again, relying on the Sheriff's Department is that partnership and collaboration when those things do come about. So we talked about the first year. That first year means starting January, this coming January, and moving in that first year. So it's moving very quickly in terms of going forward. So it's not a year from now. It's not 2 years from now. It's actually moving as soon as we possibly can in terms of the planning and actually standing up the agency. So there's a lot of work. Actually, we had an opportunity to meet with some of the staff. They didn't walk out on us, so I think they're going to stick through it, but it's really critical for them to be involved in this process because there's a lot of planning going on, and they're very adept at doing that already, but now they're going to be taking a lot more in terms of standing up a brand new organization and moving forward. And then what we hope to have happen, so in that first year, we're looking for the first wave of DCPOs, the initial DCPOs, identifying where those geographic boundary areas are and assigning them to them and getting the training they need. We've actually started thinking about who are the partners that are going to be doing the training. In many cases, it's going to be those social service agencies that are going to provide that kind of training. It's going to be a local community college that's going to be involved in that training in terms of going forward and building that kind of capacity and making sure that they're getting the skill set and the information they need so they can be effective out in the field in terms of that critical problem solving and problem thinking. And then year 2, thinking about incrementally how do we start to look back in the prior year in terms of successes, where we need to go forward, and incrementally building those new milestones and things we want to achieve. So forecasting what's going to happen in that second year, and then forecasting what's going to happen in the third year going forward.
We're just going to jump to questions in a second.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I think Bob talked about those, the year 2 operational phase, and this depends upon approval of moving forward, but everybody's prepared to just start moving forward and get this implemented as soon as possible. So you'll see a big piece of the implementation in the first 6 months. A lot of things have to go in place. It's a lot of work, but that's the expectation, and we think it can happen. And this is really the next part of it, is looking at that. So how do we get there, and where do we go next? And it's developing a very detailed strategic management plan, and taking all these principles, taking this paper and saying, what do we have to do? What are the timelines? So, and it may be week-to-week goals on achieving things. By next Friday, you have to have this. The next Monday, you have to have that. And really getting together really solid action plans so that you all and everybody here will continue continue to see progress as it's moving forward. Because we're looking at a very tight time frame for getting the first implementation, means a lot of really small tight timelines for the other pieces as well. So that's the consideration. So we really wanted to open up to questions. Most importantly, so you can look at the PowerPoint, you can read this, and you can hear us talk, but you may have some questions in your mind. So we really want to open up to you to find out any questions about this, some other things that we can address for you.
Commissioners?
You guys want to both be available. So.
Well, I would just like to thank you for involving us in this process and keeping us informed. So normally I think I would have a lot of questions, but quite frankly, we've been in the loop. So I just applaud the effort. And as we've said before, is that the work's ahead of you. It's very ambitious, but it's a great outline. So congratulations, and we'll see what the City Council's going to do with it and how it goes forward. But I think you've outlined something that has potential for great success.
So my oversight was that the Criminal Justice Commission plays a very important role in this process as well. So I didn't want you all to think you were getting off the hook in terms of how this kind of works and operates. But you're going to be key advisors to Lee and the department in terms of shaping this and where it's going. So if you read in the report, CJC is featured very much in that report going forward as well. So.
And Lee, this is something that you've been working on for a while. I mean, obviously, it's just not something to just...
It's been discussion, and we've had some clear direction from the mayor and the vice mayor and the council. And then where do we fill those gaps? And as we see that, it's been an expectation over the last 2 decades that, hey, you got a problem, oh, let's hand it off to the law enforcement, give it to the sheriff's department, give it to the police department to handle. And a lot of those things, that is not a law enforcement function necessarily traditionally. So it's where do those things come into things? And as we look at the resource management issues and how we're re-arresting people over and over and what's taking place legislatively and the burden on Mr. Sherwood and the DAs and the judicial process and the public defender's office, all those burdens, what's the outcome? So this is really getting down to discovering what the roots of those problems may be, how to identify those issues and resolve them. And that component, it's different. I mean, it's uncomfortable for some things, and we have a role to play in all of it, but I think what's nice about this is it gives us an opportunity to apply different strategies to things and develop a process and trial and error, too. There's going to be some of that as well. What worked here, what didn't work there. These folks have been gratefully insightful for the experiences they've had, and I think it's a great opportunity for us as a city to move a direction that see where it goes. And see what kind of effect we can have.
Now, implementing this will have no effect on the penalty for shoplifting or anything like that. I mean, they'll be handling that, but it still won't affect the fact that with the shoplifting that's going on and with the burglaries that's taking place, they're back on the streets. None of that will be affected.
Well, it depends. I mean, effect. As far as shoplifting is concerned, with a pretty aggressive administrative site process, it's had an effect. Okay, but what's the outcome? And then again, going deeper, as was explained here in the presentation, going deeper into what's creating that issue. And that's really what the opportunity here is. And as we've seen in some of this youth intervention model we've done through the schools, right? Why is a kid not coming to school? Well, the reality is it might not just be a recalcitrant child that has no desire to go to school. There could be effects and things taking place in the home or some other issue that's occurred that's prohibiting that child from coming to school. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's a different philosophy of just the punitive aspect and penalty and all those things, but actually looking in causation and what creates some of these issues. And then getting down to that, because the idea being, obviously, the better standard raising the quality of life in our community enhances everything. Business, people's values, all the type of activity, how people secure and perceive their community. So I think that's what I see as the opportunity of it. And we touch on that in some of the things we go out there and do, but we're certainly not all qualified experts in law enforcement of what service providers exist, what their role is, all those things. This takes that into account on what opportunities are out there for other resources to be brought into play in a prohibitive way.
Opens the door. I mean, a complete different philosophy, yeah.
Right. And so we don't want to take anything away from what the Sheriff's Department has been doing, because they've been doing much of this. They don't have the capacity to do the deep dives all the time. They have their community policing officers out there. They're actually trying to solve those problems. They just don't have the time to do it. They're going to be responding, and that's the very reactive nature of policing. But we're trying to really push the envelope on the proactive nature of policing and really add to that and augment that so that it's not all reactive and we can get ahead of some things.
Yeah, we don't want to take away from our Sheriff's Department because they do a fantastic job. Yeah, exactly. So it's to enhance. Anything else?
Well, I think one of the things, so you guys have been working on this and thinking about it in great detail for a long time, and a lot of it is well understood to you, and so to a certain extent when you use phrases like deep dive and problem solving, since I missed out on a lot of the conversations that you've been having, be more concrete. Let's suppose we're going to do a deep dive. What does that mean?
So what it means is we're going to actually find where we're finding the repetitive and chronic issues going. So a majority of the calls are repetitive in nature. It's the same location, the same people who are involved in. And the question you're fundamentally asking, we don't do very well in policing a lot of times because we don't have the time, is why? Why is this person constantly encountering this person? Why am I going back to that address over and over again? And so what it means by deep dive is finding out what is the systemic cause, what's the cause why that situation has evolved into a police problem, right? And then figuring out how do I get at the root cause. It could be an issue around addiction, right? It could be an individual who is now relying upon crime, robberies in the cars, robberies in houses, to support their habit. So the deep dive and the resolution is how do I get that person connected to services? How do I get that person so they get the treatment they need? It abates and stops that repetitive nature of the crime. It prevents future harm to the community, at the same time moving the person into a right direction so they can actually get on with their life and improve their quality of life as well. And I've removed that situation. You'll see dramatic reductions in calls for service as I start to focus on repetitive crimes first. Because if I'm not going back to the same household 20, 25 times, because I've resolved that issue, it has a dramatic impact over time incrementally with respect to my overall calls for service going forward. What you'll see is the DCPO's calls go up like this. So you'll see an inverse correlation. Calls for service going down, contacting my DCPOs going way up in terms of reaching out to them. And as Betty indicated, getting in front of the problem as opposed to waiting for the problem to occur and then responding to it afterwards.
So I think I understand what a deep dive is. The question is, what's the mechanics of it? So let's suppose we have a repetitive calls from a particular unit. What's going to happen? What person is going to take what action?
So what it means is a change in philosophy and mindset in terms of thinking about how I deal with the issue. And then it means myself being the DCPO actually figuring out, okay, what resource do I need to get involved in the situation, and then connecting that person or that family to those services in terms of making sure that they get the service they need to address the issues that are going on in that house. So that DCPO becomes critical and a core piece in terms of identifying the problem, working with that family or individual, getting them connected to service, and then doing the follow-up. The other piece that's really critical in terms of their involvement is that when a crime does happen, who's going back to that household afterwards and making sure they have the services and the information that they need relative to the investigation. So it's that one-on-one, it's that interpersonal relationship that exists between the DCPO and the people within their geographic fenced areas.
So if there's a repetitive call from a household, then, and the Sheriff's Department's getting these repetitive calls, they contact someone, an agency, and that agency then puts someone in a car and sends them to the house. They knock on the door, talk to the people. Help me understand what
it
happens.
is, it's a constant transfer of data from the Sheriff's Department to the analytical people that are going to be in this new entity, analyzing and figuring where those problems are, figuring what's causing or driving some of those things. It's up to that person who's been assigned to that geographic area, a DCPO that's assigned to this department, to now respond to that household, also work with that family, work with individuals, work with the community to figure out what's the solution to that problem in terms of dealing with it, and then making sure that they do the follow-up in terms of going forward. So it's a little bit more seamless in terms of the Sheriff's Department calling the new entity. It's that transfer information, analyzing that information, and then going back out and figuring out what's causing or driving that problem.
So in effect, we're introducing a layer of law enforcement,
Yes.
and maybe that's not the right phrase, but a layer of people to interact with the community that doesn't necessarily require the training and experience of a sheriff's deputy, but can act as a go-between?
Okay, so they're going to have the same training experience, but it'll be augmented. Their training experience will be in problem solving and in services in their area and in a number of other areas that are, some people call them softer skills. They still will be armed. They still have the authority to arrest. The difference is that the sheriff's department may call Lee's department and say, hey, we are seeing this. Are you seeing the same thing? There should be, the process in the next year will be developing how those relationships are conducted, how they're communicating, when they're communicating, and how they're responding to each other. So it's not a different layer. It's an addition of what they're doing, and in a way passing it on, not always by a call by the Sheriff's Department. Hopefully, the DCPOs are recognizing it before it becomes a problem. It can be a call from the community member who says, hey, I'm having this constant problem, but it's not getting resolved. It could be all of those things, but it's an actual individual that you know that you call that's responsible for that area and not responding to calls for service, so they're not being detracted by those concerns.
And that DCPO would be reporting back on other issues that could be underlying in that area. It's just not that particular incident.
Right.
Correct?
Right,
Yeah.
That's correct.
So they're going to be reporting on things that possibility of what caused this problem and going more in depth to it, right?
And if they can't handle it at their level, that's why it's so important for the administration now to bump it up. So if it's something that's much larger and systemic, so for example, if you have a chain of stores where you're having chronic problems and it seems that people are targeting that store and you find out it's because they're not taking the precautionary measure, anti-theft measures they should be taking, that might require Lee reaching out to corporate headquarters and saying, okay, you got to change your practices here, right? So it could be something that's larger and more systemic, but it's a system and the same philosophy that operates through the whole organization in terms of going forward.
So to the degree that the Sheriff's Department, as you've commented, are a little bit overwhelmed and they don't have the resources to do this, the city, if I understand it, then is going to provide these resources by hiring new people and training them to fill a function that is not being filled now.
That's good.
And it's really representing your values and your concerns in your community. It's the quality of life issues that you feel are very important that they can concentrate on as well. So we're starting out with what they have, and then it'll be augmented.
And one of the comments was about metrics. What metrics do you look to see if it works? What are you suggesting?
So there's actually three general categories of metrics. One is around community engagement and sentiment and trust. And now a lot of that's done through actually gauging and measuring what people feel about the police in terms of trust, which is it's an assessment, it's quantitative or qualitative, so it's really hard to get at, but it's through some kinds of surveys, it's through a lot of electronic and digital things that are being used in other jurisdictions where they're actually getting feedback from the community in real time. It's going to community meetings and making sure that you're listening to the meetings and bringing the folks out and engaging just how much they're involved in the problem-solving process. The other piece is the problem-solving model. How effective are these individuals in terms of identifying problems? How effective are they in addressing those problems? And then how effective they are sustaining and maintaining the solutions they put into place. And it's also about their level of engagement with the community going forward. Clearly, the most evident one is where you have those chronic and repetitive issues. You'll see statistically, and you want to see those things shrink. And so another measure would be calls for service and the stack level for sheriff's departments and how many calls are getting stacked. Am I reducing that level because I'm dealing with some of the more chronic and repetitive issues? So it frees up the sheriff's deputies to be a lot more responsive and not find themselves in a situation where they're chasing calls a good part of their shift. So there's a direct benefit internally as well as externally in terms of what the work that these individuals are going to be doing. There's a whole series of metrics that we're going to actually be generating and providing to Lee and then making sure how they're being tracked on an ongoing basis.
So there'll be, on the one hand, people measuring community response by surveys or text or phone calls or something like that. Somebody will be assigned to that task.
It'll also be the community's responsibility, too. So we're going to be looking for people that we call community partners and also people within the community that are going to help give us that kind of feedback going in terms of collecting information as well. It's about bringing the community into the process as well, not saddling the agency with all the responsibility. So it's that shared responsibility we talked about before.
And the other half of the metrics have to do with the decrease in some kind of problem that we're currently facing now that we hope that will be improved. For example, frequency of phone calls, shoplifting, crime, vagrancy, and other kinds of problems. And those will be measured over a period of time. I guess the control is what's happened previously, and now we're moving into a phase where we're introducing a new element. We're going to see if there's a change.
What's the baseline, and then what we're looking at against that baseline.
Okay, thank you.
Question. Speaking of the DCPO, and when you're ready to deploy DCPO, and are they going to hire in locally, or you already have a DCPO?
I think, obviously, we'll have some type of application process through Human Resources, and we'll take applications and evaluate who's the best qualified people for the job. They're going to have to fit in a certain criteria that we're going to discuss in depth of what type of personality type, because personality type will be kind of unique as it relates to this. And there's certainly been some discussion we've had of what we're looking for, but we're looking for someone that's highly motivated and enthusiastic and doesn't work within just a certain guideline of hours and is willing to take calls at night or in the middle of the night or whatever that may be, and it's responsive. So at the same time, being excited about not necessarily someone that's a person that, and I'll use Betty's term earlier, hooking, booking people and kicking doors down, but someone that's more attuned to looking at all aspects of a potential situation to come up with some remedy. And I mean, really,
DCPO will be a city employee then?
Pardon me? City employee, yes.
Yes, so we intend to start out with some of the retired individuals, particularly from the Sheriff's Department who may know this area, that to kind of boost it. But over time, we'll be developing qualities and skill sets and personality sets that we will want to hire to. And we will advertise and we will try to bring in people. Those may be individuals from the Sheriff's Department, and over time they may be other individuals. But at this point, to boost and jumpstart it, we have some really qualified individuals that are already working in the Public Safety Department with the skill set, that know the area, that have the relationships, that know the Sheriff's Department, and we can move forward right away, and then over time augment that with other individuals.
With the Sheriff's Department, all the deputies they have been through the training and the academy. What are we going to require of the people working for our police department? Are they all going to have to go through some form of training, and where is that training going to take place?
Go ahead.
So they're all going to be post-certified, which is California Peace Officer Standards and Training. They have to go through the 600 and some hours of training to be post-certified. Most of the sheriff's deputies that are retiring will have that training, and we will augment that training with problem-solving skills and some other critical thinking skills, etc., training for that. We've had good conversations with Antelope Valley College about developing some of those courses and developing courses and training to continue that. So anybody that's hired as a DCPO will have to be post-certified. They will get augmented training based on critical thinking, community policing, problem solving, and all the other issues.
The Sheriff's Department's a big county organization, of which the Lancaster Station is one part of that. So to some extent, I'm sure this is something you guys have talked about with the Sheriff's Department. What's the level of autonomy that our Lancaster Station has to coordinate with a new model like this?
I think at this point, I mean, we're going to have lots of things that we're going to develop, and that'll be a developing issue, determining where those thresholds lie. So again, we're at a point now where we're going to be moving forward in a direction over the next several months on how this all looks. as it relates to that relationship. I think the thing is the Sheriff's Department is going to have things that they believe based on their response and things that based on priority setting. So obviously emergent and high priority calls are one thing, or anything that's a criminal investigation that rises to a level that's appropriate for their handle. Then on the other side of it is making those determinations. And more now, and especially Mr. Sherwood could probably speak to this, with diversion and things becoming more of the norm as it relates to certain activity that is occurring out in the community, there's a better use of the sheriff's resources on those high-level issues and more involved investigations than it would be necessarily on some of these other things. So, but again, this is developing, right, as we develop this process, and we're not ready to roll it out today, okay? We're going to go through a process and interact with the community members and stakeholders in the community and agencies, the Sheriff's Department, the CHP. Everyone has a role to play in developing this process, and then how that shapes up and how it looks today versus where it is now in the future is going to be probably changing as we work through this process. Now it's just basically an outline of the direction we're going, what the philosophy is behind it. Does it make sense based on the issues that we've been dealing with for the last 10 years as it relates to public safety? All those things are being included in those conversations. So that's where we stand today.
Thank you.
What about some input from Captain Weber?
That's what I was wondering, too.
Well, absolutely. I mean, sure, there'll be an appropriate time in those discussions to take place.
And it may be premature at this point, but Captain Weber, do you have some comments to add at this time?
Well, we've been talking about this for about a year now, and public safety is always a collaborative effort, right? It's a team sport. It's not just the Sheriff's Department. It's the Sheriff's Department. It's the CHP. It's the DA, probation, parole. We work with DPS already, whether it's code enforcement or whatever. This is just another layer to that, and that we'll look into, and we'll have to work all the details out. But there's certainly value to it. There's certainly opportunities here, and in reality, the Sheriff's Department and law enforcement in general is expensive. It's expensive, and this is a way that the city can try to not only solve problems or work collaboratively, but do so fiscally responsible. In a manner as fiscally responsible. But there will be stuff we have to work out, certainly, and that stuff will come up along the way when we decide what roles everyone's going to take. But just to give you an answer right now, we can't, because it's still being developed, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's consistent. And we had a lot of conversations with the captain, lieutenant, several people at the station, and understandably, you can't commit to a model that's not even on paper yet. So understanding what it means, but to be the input from them is also incorporated into this model, and understanding kind of like what some of their needs are and what their understandings of the community are. So it's an ongoing process, but they were included in the start process. Of course, as you get further, you can start looking at protocols and how to develop these things and how to work together.
And this is something that we're hoping to have up and running in 6 months or so?
Well, again, it's over a phase over time, but I can tell you it's going to be a pretty aggressive window, okay, to roll things out in 6 months. But again, understanding that there's a strategic plan over time. So, and if things grow, our sheriff contract initially in 77 and what it is today is two different things. I mean, so there's going to be things that are going to work through this process, and I think we need to be not afraid to try things and develop it however it develops, and that's going to involve the community input as well, and that how people see. It's interesting when you get into groups, and we know this from town halls, and you guys participated, how things we see on certain levels, and then how it looks to people on the ground and what their priorities are and how they view their community, all have a value in the conversation. We did that Monday night, as we talked about another issue. And so I think that's going to be worthwhile as we go through this process, especially the next 6 months, and having those conversations out with the stakeholders in the community and community representatives and different groups, and then it'll develop from there.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation.
Really, great presentation. Appreciate it. Thank you. Look forward to being part of this whole process, this commission. Thank you so much. Public business from the floor, agendized items. Any person would like to address the Lancaster Criminal Justice Commission on any agendized item is requested to complete a speaker card at the commission and turn it into the commission secretary. We're going to get to that. Yeah, we get to that next. Okay. You have 3 minutes. We have 2 cards that want to speak on this particular item. Mr. David Paul.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, good morning. I want to say hi, Betty. I had a wonderful time with you during the interview. That was just great. You know, I'm going to get up here for non-agendized and say a bunch of good things. And the things I'm going to say now are not bad things, but they're just things that came to mind. And we talked about the caliber of individuals that we need to hire to fill these things, problem solvers, free thinkers, all these things. That's true. That's true. But there is this difficulty, a national trend over 20 years of finding qualified people for law enforcement roles to do these things. So this is like a cream of the crop sort of a situation in a low job. I sit on the Antelope Valley Homeless Commission. I'm the chair of the problem-solving subcommittee. And I've been admonished through time because they don't want to solve problems. They want to define what problem solving is without getting out there and to do it. And what I see is, I mean, I am grateful for the effort, and I think a lot of what is said has merits, but there are bottlenecks in these systems. So if you got a knucklehead in some neighborhood that's causing repeated problems and there's nowhere to put them and there's no enforcement, that's going to stay there. I mean, I long for the old days when the samurai would come around and just dispense justice on the spot. And these were guys that had a good mind, problem solvers, you know. There's people that want help, and then there's knuckleheads. I mean, it sounds like profiling or something, but I started my career in public service as a mental health technician with developmentally disabled people. And over time you learn, I can see if someone has an extra Y chromosome. And this, I also refine these skills in prison. I worked in prison, walking through there. You can see the fetal alcohol syndrome. You can see the head injury. You can see all the trauma that has shaped people on this sort of a path. And when there aren't services for them, there aren't mental health beds and facilities, and we're trying to build it up, and we're trying, and the bottom line is that there's a lot of bottlenecks in the system to get people to help for that district police officer to funnel the people to. So there'll just be another holding pattern there, and I'm confident, though, that we can work through these things, and I'm glad that you're doing this, Lee, because I know you have the mind to come at these things fresh, but we have to build up our capacity on the other end to deal with some of these problems. But I'm all for it. I'm in. Help any way I can, and thank you.
David, it's always a pleasure to hear from you. Mike Cooper.
Feels kind of odd that I have to do this during work, doing the speaker card. And so I'm speaking both as a citizen, as a retired deputy, reserve deputy, and a current contractor with the city. From the first time that we met with the consultants, there's 4 of us in my company that have about 130 years of LA County law enforcement experience together. We were very excited because right off from the get-go, community-oriented policing was brought up as the focus. And what I see, and I have a lot of deputies that are asking me questions all the time about when's the PD going to be, who they're going to hire. What I try to explain is that this PD, this hybrid PD, there's 2 main beneficiaries. Number one is we have a large segment of the population up here that's being underserved, not intentionally. Those hard-working people that get on the 14, drive to work, law-abiding citizens, don't commit any crimes. If their house is burglarized, it could take several hours to get somebody over there to take a report. If their car gets stolen, if their teenager runs away from home, these are all calls that are non-priority calls, and our deputies are busy going to priority calls. From call to call to call, they come out of briefing, they log on, they've got 5 or 6 calls in their buffer waiting already. Maybe all of them are priority calls, maybe some of them are, but they leave the station 5 calls down, and when they come in, they're still 5 calls down. We have so many priority calls going out that, you know, the routine calls, they just can't get to them. If you have an alarm, burglar alarm goes off at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe somebody's going to get there in a timely fashion, but as a monitor of the false alarm warning program, I know that you know, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 hours to go to an alarm call. Well, 99.9% of them are false, but if it is a real call, then a couple-hour response isn't going to get it. The bad guys, the real criminals, are getting all the attention from the sheriff's deputies, and that's good. We want that. We want them to get hooked and booked and going to jail. We want to get the bad guys off the street, but we also need to take care of the good people. The ones whose alarm goes off, their teenagers run away, their car gets stolen, they got a neighborhood dispute, neighborhood feud. These kind of things can be dealt with a hybrid PD. And you're going to get guys, some of the guys they're going to hire are going to be retired deputies. I have several retired friends that are inquiring that are ready to go to work. So when they spoke about having sector officers in charge of a sector, you're going to get experienced people like, you know, myself with 30 years, got Dan Hunt, 30 years, former detective, one of our top detectives, Craig Husbands, former sergeant, Narcotics Bureau, Detective Bureau. There are some really squared away people, problem solvers, that are going to know how to do these deep dives. And in the same fashion, you know, this PD is going to be able to serve those that are currently underserved right now because of deputies are busy arresting the bad guys. So I'm very for this this new PD. There's no doubt in my mind that they're going to attract some very quality people, and frankly, I'm really excited about it. So, like I say, the biggest beneficiaries are going to be, you know, our citizens that are going to get some attention, and they're going to get some attention from experienced people that are going to know how to solve their problems.
Mike, thank you very much. Your wording was perfect. I mean, whatever hesitation I had helped me get over that hump. I mean, I like what you had to say. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mike, thank you for your service, too, and continual service. Thank you so much. Moving forward, consent calendar, approval of minutes, November 13th, 2019. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes? We entertain
Move to accept.
we have a motion to accept.
Second.
Second. Please vote. We good? Oh. One more time. Please vote. Okay, we passed 4-0.
There's 5 of us.
5 of us, 5-0. Yeah, me. Did you write it?
You need to vote.
I need to vote. I pressed it 3 times now. This button's not working. Staff presentations, reports, updates and reports. Sheriff's Department. Deputy, how are you, sir?
How are you, sir?
Good, sir.
It's just me today, so I got
Doing double duties there, huh?
There we go. Awesome. I got it. Good morning, everybody. Deputy Lawrence Green, Lancaster Sheriff Station's Community Relations Deputy. I will be doing the Crime Commission report for October today. And happy holidays and Merry Christmas, by the way. Alrighty. Let's see here. All right, today we're going to start with our burglaries. Total burglaries in October were 71. We're going to be up from 66 from September. Residential burglaries are at 44, up from 35 from September. And commercial burglaries are down to 27. Down from 31. For our robberies, total robberies for October are going to be 22. We're going to be down from 31 in September. For armed robberies, we're going to be up 12, down from 9 in September. And the strong arm, we're going to be down to 10 from 22 in September. All of our crime prevention was conducted through social media, Neighborhood Watch, and Business Before Breakfast. We have our community engagement, Coffee with the Deputy, Crazy Autos, we do every month. We also have Cole Middle School's Red Ribbon Week for October. That went really well, huge turnout, hundreds of kids. We have Laps for Literacy. That was during our Glow Run Rock for closer to Halloween. Kids dressed up and we interacted with the community. We had a bunch of, they gave out food for the low-income families, vegetables and that sort of thing. We had the Boulevard, another community engagement that we did for October. Huge turnout. Kids from all over the city came, participated with our deputies. We have our trunk or treat over at Valley Oasis. That went really well. The kids and families there got a bunch of candy. The citizens there loaded up their trunks and decorated them for Halloween. So that'll be our community engagement for... Let's go over to our city comp stats. Alrighty. Thank you. All right, our comp stats for the city of Lancaster. Homicides, still averaging 1 October. No up or down for that. For our rapes, excuse me. That's our homicide stats. For our rapes, we're going to be at around 15, averaging 10. Just to go a little more detail into that, there's no serial rapists or anything like that. These are all stats that are either delayed reporting, domestic, or acquainted related, okay? So that's what we have for rapes. For robberies, we're going to be down, averaging about 20, down to 20, averaging about 31. Aggravated assaults are going to also be down, averaging 78, or around 65, somewhere around there, give or take. Domestic violence-related aggravated assaults are going to be slightly up, averaging 12 or around 14. For burglaries, we're going to be slightly up, averaging 65. We're going to be around 72, give or take. Larceny and thefts are down, which is awesome for this time of year. We're going to be averaging 163. We're going to be about 145, give or take. And we're going to be holding steady, averaging 51 for grand theft vehicles. For arsons, we're going to be down. It's averaging 5, but we're actually at around 4. This will be our hot spot for the month, for October. And there any questions or concerns regarding our city comp stats?
Questions, Commissioner?
I would like to just make a comment that you're putting the definitions down there as we talked about. I really appreciate
that. Absolutely. So if anybody has any questions, yes, the definition of each crime is on there as well. Thank you. We're going to be doing the leaps now. Bear with me here. Alrighty. LEAPS during the month of October, LEAPS was dispatched 109 times, totaling 32 hours, providing tactical surveillance, and was airborne, providing strategic surveillance for 340.5 hours. This month, LEAPS provided airborne observation and support in the arrest of 17 suspects. LEAPS provided surveillance during the recovery of 5 stolen vehicles, provided support during a vehicle pursuit of a robbery suspect. LEAPS also responded to a burglary call and was able to track the suspect until deputies arrived. LEAPS provided aerial surveillance during the apprehension of a murder suspect as well. LEAPS is also used to provide surveillance for specific targeted locations. Detectives use the system to obtain aerial imagery and data in the evidence-gathering stages of property crimes and crimes against persons investigation. For the month of October, LEAPS led to 17 arrests, 15 fights and assaults, 16 burglaries, robberies, 14 traffic stops, 43 other offenses, suspicious persons, circumstances, and persons with a gun, 4. So, out of that, 20% involved people, 15% involved arrests and detentions, 18 involved property, 14% involved vehicles, and the other 39% were involving observations only. And that will be the report for LEAPS for the month of October. Are there any questions? All right. That'll be the stats for Lancaster Station. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if I may, just a quick overview.
Yes.
I know everyone wants to get here after that long night last night, but where we're at right now, we're about 7% down overall for Part 1 crimes. Burglaries are down. October total about 27% or so. Where we've been holding. One of the concerns that always comes up is the rape stats, which Deputy Green talked about being somewhat deceiving. If you look at month to month, since about July, we've seen a marked increase of reports, and that's about the time the new legislation went through that allows people to report sexual assaults longer out and us prosecute them longer out. And since then, we've seen our numbers increase greatly, and most of them are from outside the reporting period. And like Green said, most of what we see are either spousal rapes, some kind of acquaintance rapes, which are not good either, but those numbers can be kind of scary, and it gives a little more perspective to what we're seeing out there. A couple great arrests the deputies made last year, or October. We had a serial robber who was working off the Grindr app, which is a social media app where people hook up, in essence. We had a guy out here who was hooking up with people and then robbing them when they showed up. He was good for 4 or 5 robberies. We've got him in custody. And then we had another robber who was working not only our area, but Kern County, Santa Clarita, and Palmdale. And detectives from Palmdale, Lancaster, and Santa Clarita all got together, shared information, and got those individuals in custody over also. So some great collaboration, some good arrests, and that's about where we're at right now, about 7% down Part 1 crimes.
Captain, I got a question. I know I've been a victim, and I know several friends have been victim of mailboxes. Is that a high increase this year, more than normal, or is that just typical for this time of year?
You know, we see that. It comes and goes. It's not unusual, especially, I'm assuming you live in an area that has the banks of mailboxes.
Actually, mine's an individual mailbox, but I had another friend of mine that has the banks, and the whole back was ripped off.
Yeah. Or they get the keys. I don't know how some, they have special keys for those, and we see them get it. Some times of the year are greater than others. But that's something we'll see come up. We'll look for that. Every 2 weeks, we do a heat map. Our crime analyst does heat maps, not only by, for the 2-week period, but by shift, by area, so that you can see what days, what times, what shifts, what areas are hot by your shift every 2 weeks. So they know what's going on. And when those come up, we get with Postal Service and deal with them. But it is something that comes up occasionally, and it's usually drug users. That's a drug-driven crime, and they're looking for whatever checks they can get or identity theft. But that's typically you'll see that with drug-driven stuff, and we have seen it this year in spurts. I don't know that it's more, because that's just one of those things you get in spurts here and there.
Thank you.
Captain, in lieu of the holiday season for our general public, any points that we normally give out for our shoppers out there that they should beware of?
Sure. The basic ones, the big ones are everyone's in a hurry, they're shopping, they're not paying attention to their purses. It's not uncommon, especially like in grocery stores or big box stores, where a female will have her purse in the cart, and you'll have one player try to distract that individual while another player takes a credit card out of her wallet, and then they just move on, leaving the wallet and purse in place, and they'll go right down that strip mall, banging out purchases on that credit card, and by the time that person gets up to the counter and realizes their card is gone, they purchase made. So be cognizant of that. Keep your purses locked up, or zipped up, snapped, however you can do it. And what I would say, if you're doing big Christmas shopping, try to make different trips to your car so your hands aren't always full. Take some stuff up, lock it up in the trunk, come back, do some more shopping, and be aware when you're walking around in the mall, whether it's in a mall or in a parking lot. Just be aware of your surroundings. Don't have your head in your phone, because there are all those opportunists who are looking to snatch your packages and goes. But those are the big ones. Just be aware of where you're at. Keep your eyes open. Keep your purses zipped up and snapped as secure as you can keep them. Don't flash a lot of cash. People will count cash at the in the lines or whatever. Keep that stuff hidden, and just be aware of your surroundings.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
There will be coffee with the deputies at Crazy Autos tomorrow, and they will cover it up, all those holiday shopping safeties and all. So if any of you just participate with that, it starts at 8 o'clock tomorrow.
Yes, and we will be there presenting. One other thing is, make sure if you guys have like a dark colored blanket, try to leave it in your car and cover your gifts, because if you don't have any tinted windows and the gift is in plain sight, it creates sort of like a red light for them to break into your vehicle. Yeah, just keep it in the trunk, or if you have something covered, don't leave it in plain sight. It's just, but we'll be going all over that at Coffee with the Dep tomorrow at 8 a.m. at Crazy Autos on Avenue I.
And one more quick, I'm sorry, sir. Just one more quick big one. People like to post all these great vacations they're going on Facebook, whatever. Don't do it, because the bad guys know that you have all these gifts fresh from Christmas in your house, and you're going on vacation the next week or week after that. People pay attention to that, so don't. Wait till you get back to post your great vacation pictures or your great vacation plans.
Thank you, Dip. Thank you, Captain.
Thank you.
California High Patrol. You're up.
Morning, Commissioners. I have a few stats. It's not inclusive just for Lancaster, it's for the Antelope Valley area. In October and November combined, there were a total of 90 arrests for driving under the influence, both alcohol and drugs. In October and November, October, we had 85 property damage only collisions, 53 injury collisions, 9 involving DUI drivers, and 3 fatalities. And in November, we investigated 97 property damage only collisions, 68 injury collisions, 13 involving DUI driver, and 4 fatalities. Year to date, the Antelope Valley area has investigated 34 fatality collisions. And then as far as community service goes, our Chips for Kids program is going strong. Currently collected over 3,300 toys. And they are distributed through the SAVES program, Boys and Girls Club, and various organizations. They contact our office and make a request for a certain amount of toys to be distributed to underprivileged kids in the community. Any questions?
Any questions? Great job.
Thank you.
District Attorney's Office.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Good. Just to follow up on one of the serial robbers that Captain Weber was talking about, the one that was using the app. He pled guilty, I think Thursday or Friday last week, was sentenced to 16 years in prison. So he won't be robbing anybody for the near future. So that's good. Our misdemeanors were way down, filing 191, so I think we were just getting caught up on the backlog. Anything below 250 is pretty good, so 191 is a good number. Felonies are also down 92, down from 110 the month before. So anything below 100 is pretty good. So that's actually all I've got. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays.
Merry Christmas to you. Jocelyn.
Good morning. Just continuing to plug away on the rental housing ordinance. I had hoped to have that for you this month, but I thought that we were doing a couple of other things at this meeting, so I put it off.